Welcome on into the Fantasy Football Forge. My name is Steve, and it is time for Week 3 wide receiver rankings. That's right, Weeks 1 and 2 are now in the books. They have come and gone very quickly, and as always seems to be the case with the NFL, we know nothing. Jon Snow. We're still learning. We will continue to learn throughout the rest of the season. With that, if you are new to the channel, my rankings will look different next week. Once I have 3 weeks of data, I feel comfortable starting to make my projections. So I will have projections. I will have an expected range of outcomes, not just a single projected number, but an expected range that you can expect those players typically hit within about 66% of the time, 2/3 of the time, they will land within that range. So keep an eye out for that next week, or get excited about that. But obviously for this week, we're going to recap my loves and my fades, just like stardoms and situms, and I'll give you the new ones for week 3. So look forward to that in this episode. Lots of looking forward to things, right? And I want to let you know you can find these rankings up on the website, www.thefforge.com. And there's a link down in the description to the rankings. The rankings will be posted up tonight, Wednesday evening. They'll all be available for every position. And the running backs video will also come out this evening. And then quarterbacks and tight ends in one video come out tomorrow morning. So you can look forward to those things. And rankings are not final. They will get updated. That is part of the reason that I post them up there on the website for you to see. Also, I'm only going to be going through about 37 wide receivers in this video, so that's just how the tiers worked out today. So you can check out the rest of the rankings too up on the website once they're posted, and you can always come and see them live here on YouTube. I go live for your start sit questions, trade questions, etc. 3 times between now and the end of the week. I will be live at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on a Thursday prior to the Thursday Night Football game. And same time, Saturday evenings. We had a lot of people come through last Saturday, very successful. I was up, I think it was about a 3-hour broadcast, so that was great. And then 2 hours prior to kickoff Sunday mornings, I am also live with my final rankings, and the rankings will be up on the screen each and every one of those events. So with that out of the way, I think that's everything. Let's focus on week 2. How did I do with my loves and my fates? I did differently depending on which one. For my loves, I gave myself 1 out of 3 I got right here. So Brandon Ayuk, Stephon Diggs would be the 2 I did not get correctly. Each of them averaging scored about 6 fantasy points. So that's not enough from a guy that we love. Jameson Williams, however, did come through. A wide receiver 23 finish. Didn't have an absolutely fantastic day, but I was higher up on him than the experts, and he came through for me. So that was a victory there. In terms of the fades, I gave myself 2.5 out of 3 here. So Christian Kirk had less than a half of a fantasy point, so obviously that was a successful fade. Jaden Reed had 5.6 fantasy points. Tried warning people about that there just wouldn't be great opportunities. I think you can be happy that you got 5.6. Expect there to possibly be a wrinkle this week to maybe, I think I'm a little bit higher on him this week, mostly because I'm so down on so many wide receivers. And Rashee Rice is the half point here because the game flow did work like I expected. He did not receive the volume of work that he normally does. He only had 6 targets, which usually for a guy who has a low ADOT, like Rashee does typically, not always, that's not going to be enough. 6 targets, you get about 6 yards every catch. Well, all right. But he did get the touchdown so that was great. And he was highly efficient on those 6 targets. He had a 40-yard plus play, a big play where they kind of leaked him out and surprised the defense a little bit, and it worked out. And so there you go. So I was wrong. I faded him, and he came through. The main thing here, though, I still had him ranked 11th, okay? So I was still really suggesting to play him. There's another argument for why I gave myself half point there. Let's move on to week 3. That's all fine and dandy, but oh gosh, here we go. My first tier of wide receivers goes from wide receiver 1 through 4, and actually, I just want to say that I do not believe that this is a great wide receiver week. My confidence level in the rankings falls off fairly quickly. Already at wide receiver after the second tier, the third tier, I've already got some big questions. But this week for the wide receivers in general, there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of injured players that we would like to be able to be starting that we, can't. There are some poor matchup for players that we'd otherwise like more. I just think that is shaping up to be a weaker wide receiver week, and or at the very least, one full of surprises. Guys on our benches blowing up. Well, guys in our, that we're starting not so blowing up. So, keep that in mind this week. But here, CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, Monter St. Brown, Rashee Rice. To me, these are the must starts this week. Rashee Rice just kind of squeaking right in here in this tier, but deservingly so. That's going to bring us on to the second tier. And this tier starts off with Justin Jefferson at wide receiver 5, followed by Nico Collins. Is my mouse out of there? There we go. Marvin Harrison Jr. in at wide receiver 7, Davante Adams at wide receiver 8. A pair of guys who was quite a bit lower on in the rankings last week, maybe a little bit too low on, but by the end results, definitely. Followed by Brandon Ayuk, Garrett Wilson, Devonta Smith, Chris Olave, Chris Godwin. So awesome to see, what happened in terms of Marvin Harrison. For Nico Collins, I don't think we can ever doubt him anymore. He has proven himself to be that guy. That was a tougher matchup. There were some concerns going into last week, and now we know. There is no matchup that is too good for Nico Collins as long as he has CJ Stroud at his quarterback. Otherwise, different quarterback. I'm open to being concerned about matchups, but not in this case. Justin Jefferson, things are looking solid there. Houston has been a little bit leaky as a secondary. He hasn't been as strong as I think their potential is yet. And so high up on that, like I said, Marvin Harrison Jr., Arizona, Detroit. Maybe this will be the game that I thought Tampa Bay, Detroit could be. Definitely could be a lot of scoring if Detroit can get that offense figured out a little bit better in this game. Otherwise, maybe upset alert again. Davante Adams, though, look, he'll actually make it into my fades kind of here. I have just a list. Slight concerns this week, but also nobody can cover him in Carolina. So, the opportunity to be efficient, even in a limited amount of work, is definitely there. Brandon Ayuk, though, going to make my love list again, right? Yeah, so I screwed up last week. I did not respect the Minnesota defense enough. Most namely, I did not respect their coordinator enough, and it took me well into last season to finally come to terms and realize that I needed to stop underestimating the Minnesota defense in terms of how tough it is to pass against them despite the talent at their cornerback position. And that is all a lot, at least thanks to their coordinator. The Rams should be a better matchup for them this week. And with Debo and McCaffrey out, I think that you got to give Ayuk another shot here. I find it really hard to sit him against the Los Angeles Rams this week. Then we've got Garrett Wilson, Devonta Smith, New Orleans. Tougher matchup, but I don't have A.J. Brown ranked right now, so because of that, we're going to put him in there. And actually, New Orleans has had quite a few passing yards against them, just because, their offense has been rocking and rolling too. Chris Olave, Chris Godwin, who I have just ahead of his partner there. And this does not have to do with how the outcome last week. Most weeks I will have Mike Evans ranked ahead of Chris Godwin. Obviously, third tier here starts off and actually goes to my wide receiver 20 there. But in terms of Mike Evans, concerned about him against Denver. Obviously, they have one of the best cornerbacks in the league who will be trying to make a tough day for Mike Evans. And Chris Godwin could find a lot more work again this week. So that's the difference there. But we're already in territory where I have concerns, question marks about these guys. Tyreek Hill, of course. We got question marks about the quarterback situation there and how that's going to work out. Seattle also, surprisingly, hasn't allowed a whole lot of passing yards against them so far, but that might be a matchup thing, so I don't want to put too much weight into that. But yeah, wide receivers 14 through 20, Mike Evans, Tyreek Hill, Malik Neighbors, DJ Moore, Zay Flowers, Jameson Williams, and DK Metcalf. So Malik Neighbors, to pick up where I left off there, going up against Cleveland, a much tougher matchup than last week, so I'm not quite expecting what we got last week from him, and a definite opportunity of failure. I will say I was thinking of fading him, and then I went and I looked at the advanced stats to see how much he's working out of the slot, because that's where Cleveland can really, really hurt you. Not to take away from the rest of that defense, but that he's barely been working out of the slot. So There we go. Didn't end up being a fade for me. DJ Moore, I would love to be more optimistic about that against Indianapolis here, but pessimistic about this Chicago offense and where the things are there. Zay Flowers, however, is my second love of the week. It is not the best matchup here going up against the Dallas Cowboys, but given this week at wide receiver and how he has performed so far this season, which has been nearly a back-end wide receiver 1, a very strong wide receiver 2, so far, after 2 games. But to me, this week, he's a mere must start for those reasons, unless you're absolutely loaded, which, you could be loaded. You could have gotten 3 of these guys in your wide receiver room, Rashee Rice, Brandon Ayuk, and Mike Evans or something like that, and start those 3 over Zay. Jameson Williams going up against Arizona, I think, reason to be optimistic about that yet again, as we saw some of that workload continue. And then, this is one of those, maybe I'm moving back. DK Metcalf going up against Miami. I expect this game to be run heavy from both sides, so that's the biggest concern. Miami's also been strong against the pass, so, that's a concern. And like I said, I expect Seattle to attack via the run game quite a bit, so just a little bit concerned about that. Maybe too concerned. Maybe I can move them up, but let's see. Miami has been a rough matchup for wide receivers, so I'm not terrified to start DK, but I do think that this could be a run-heavy game plan for Seattle if Miami doesn't come out and punch them in the face early with Skylar Thompson, which I'm obviously not necessarily expecting them to come out and punch them in the face with Skylar Thompson, but hey, same coaching tree. Maybe they'll come out with a game plan like Green Bay did last week. That's going to bring us on to this next tier here with Drake London kicking this tier off at my wide receiver 21, going all the way down to wide receiver 29. Drake London, Stephon Diggs, Xavier Worthy, Tank Dell, Michael Pittman Jr., Brian Thomas Jr., Amari Cooper, George Pickens, Calvin Ridley. This tier might still look relatively like it makes sense. Things start to get wacky after this into the next tier. But let's see, Drake London against Kansas City, there's, I think, obvious upside reasons to be willing to play Drake London there. Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell, both of them. I am concerned about them against Minnesota. Minnesota, this defensive game plan coordinator, seems to have something on this Shanahan system. And so that does concern me for Diggs and Tank Dell. But only so much, because we're already at a point where just uncertain about things. I don't love the wide receiver position already. Xavier Worthy, I think there's reasons to be optimistic with that run game. He's going to help to supplant that in some ways. He's going to get a couple more opportunities. You're going to have to bring him along a little bit further in some manners sooner than later. And why not this week against Atlanta? I'm optimistic about that. Somebody who maybe could move back a little bit in the rankings. Michael Pittman Jr., another guy who could move back in the rankings. He's going to have a couple of big weeks, I'm sure. Chicago, not the greatest of matchups, and I was expressing late in the offseason concerns about Michael Pittman Jr., thinking more about that Indianapolis position, and I didn't want to get too low on him, but maybe I just should have. I'm not too optimistic about that situation going forward. Brian Thomas Jr. looking good so far in his youth. Jacksonville offense, not so much looking too consistent, was a concern in the offseason for that. But going up against Buffalo, so there's some upside there. Amari Cooper going up against the New York Giants, obviously upside there, but concerns about that offense to some extent. George Pickens, this is a George Pickens week. This is one of those weeks where I'll have him as highly ranked as I will all season. Going up against the Chargers, surprisingly haven't allowed a whole lot of fantasy points, but I don't know that that's not a product of who they've matched up against in game flow so far. But they also will egg on that type of game flow throughout the season. Still, George Pickens only needs one big play. Calvin Ridley going up against Green Bay. I don't know. That just plopped him down here. He had a really, really good week last week. I'm still not too confident in that whole situation. Is it a good matchup, a bad matchup versus Green Bay? I really don't know for sure. That's where I ended up with Calvin Ridley. And that's going to bring us on to the final tier here, wide receiver 31 through wide receiver 35. Once again, rest of the rankings you can find up on the website. Links down in the description. But wide receiver 30 is Rashid Shaheed, followed by Jalen Waddle, Khalil Shakir, JSN, Jackson Smith-Jigba, Jerry Jeudy, Terry McLaurin, Christian Kirk, and Demarcus Robinson. So Starting off with Rashid Shaheed, I think it's a little bit irresponsible to have him ranked this high, but for a third week in a row, expecting what he's done in the first 2 weeks, I will be surprised if he comes through for a third week in a row. At the same time, given the matchup, it's a really positive matchup given what he's done in the first 2 weeks. I think we have to be really open to playing him against Philadelphia. Could definitely see him having another big play against that secondary. Jalen Waddle is my second fade, and my final actual fade. I really couldn't come up. I'm so pessimistic about so many things. I couldn't come up with a final fade. I'm just pessimistic. I'm not even necessarily fading the guys because of where the wide receiver position is at this week. So I will give you a list of guys who I have some sorts of concerns about at the end of this, but Jalen Waddle going up against Seattle, talked about the game flow, my expectations of that, and you think about the quarterback, Skylar Thompson. We've seen this not too long ago. He being Jalen Waddle is not the preferred target of Skylar Thompson. Tyreek Hill is. In my opinion, I don't think that we should expect Skylar Thompson to be able to support more than one wide receiver. We know who he prefers. We know who's a little bit easier to scheme open. It's Tyreek Hill. Plus, Seattle might have a tough defense to pass up against. That's possible. But, it'd be a different story here if we were looking at a different quarterback, but we are not. Khalil Shakir, my third and final love of the week here at wide receiver 32, going up against Jacksonville, and Khalil is performing like a low-end wide receiver 2 so far this season, and he's in a good matchup against Jacksonville, who's allowed the 8th most points to the wide receiver position through the first 2 weeks. Small sample size, but it is the case, and so I am optimistic about Khalil Shakir this week. JSN going up against Miami. I talked about my concerns about game flow there. That is why I end up having Khalil Shakir ahead of him. Khalil Shakir has been just a little bit better on the season and has been just a little bit better of a matchup. So it's close right there. Jerry Jeudy, not too far behind based on how he's performed this season and being in a really good matchup. He's somebody who I was high on in the offseason compared to where he was getting drafted and the experts. I was a little bit surprised how low everybody was on him, but I also I was not singing his praises, but through 2 weeks, he's been like a borderline wide receiver too, and it's a really good matchup. So I think you can play Jerry Jeudy in your flex with confidence, or if you have, issues at your wide receiver spot, be thankful that you drafted Jerry Jeudy. I think look for another week where you should have a nice, amount of targets. That seems to be a big part of that offense. Terry McLaurin is on the opposite side of that, of this Jerry Jeudy grouping here. Just not as good of a matchup, and it hasn't been too good of a start for him in fantasy football. Christian Kirk coming off a very poor performance, but I did expect that, so I don't want to hold that against him too much. Originally, I was holding that up against him a little bit more than I remembered. I did hate that matchup. So going up against Buffalo this week, I think that's a much better matchup. I think this offense, it's incredibly concerning that without Evan Ingram, Christian Kirk wasn't more of their game plan. You got to think that he'll become more of the game plan after last week. Maybe not. I don't know. A lot of concern here season long for Christian Kirk. But for now, for this week, I'm willing to give it a chance again. And not too much ahead of Demarcus Robinson for the Los Angeles Rams. Going up against San Francisco, so it just came down to kind of game flow expectations here. But Demarcus Robinson, optimistic this week for the potential there, given the opponent. And that is my wide receiver rankings. Now, I said I did have a list here of my other not quite fades, but concerns. So I'm concerned but still playing Devontae Adams, Garrett Wilson, Mike Evans, Malik Neighbors, DJ Moore, Stephon Diggs, Michael Pittman Jr. For all this sake, I guess, Tank Dell, although Tank Dell's just kind of in this area of, he's going to have some big blow-up games, so he's always going to be, ranked somewhere. And there's always going to be a certain amount of concern for him on a weekly basis. And don't get overly excited about Carolina's receivers, Andre Iosivas, Quentin Johnston, and Alec Pierce for this week at least. Maybe in the future. But for now, don't go starting those guys over some of these other situations where we have concerns about, is what I'm trying to get at. All right. That is it for the wide receivers. There you go. Get back up onto the top. And running back videos come out tonight. Quarterback, tight end tomorrow morning. And I'll see you live, hopefully, with any of your start sit questions, trade questions, etc. Thursday, 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Saturday, same time. Sunday morning, 2 hours prior to kickoff. Peace out.